Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from anthonymorganti.com, and this is episode 39 of Photo Critiques. In Photo Critiques, people send me in some of their best images, and I critique each shot with suggestions on how they can improve it. And today, I'm pleased to critique the work of Sabine Edrissi, and Sabine sent me in 7 great shots, so let's get started. This first one I think is kind of an unusual shot. Sabine told me she used a D90 with a 60mm macro lens. And what's interesting about it is her f-stop was at f16, which would make you think it would have great depth of field. Now she's perfectly focused on the water droplet, which is where you want to focus. It's a great exposure. But what's neat is this part here, which is just a little bit in front of that, is already out of focus, and the background is perfectly out of focus. So you would think you would have more depth of field. But looking at it, what I think happened is Sabine used an ISO of 1600, which is really a high ISO. And if you look at the shot though, there really isn't any noise. So what I think happened is, I think the shot had some noise. And I think Sabine used some noise reduction software to eliminate the noise. And in doing so, it softened the shot, and in this case it came out really nice. This part here is in nice focus, but everything else is soft. In general, if you're shooting macros, you're shooting flowers or butterflies or bugs and things like that, you want as much detail as possible, so you want to use the lowest ISO you can, as low as your camera will go. I mentioned this before. So the lowest ISO your camera will go, and generally speaking, you want the f-stop kind of applicable to what you're shooting. So if you're shooting a butterfly that's really flat to the camera, its wings are laying flat out, and you're shooting straight down on it, well, you could get with the f-stop, 5.6 or something more wide open. So the stuff behind the butterfly is blurrier. If it's praying mantis with its head is towards you and its tail is away from you, you might have to use f16 to get the whole praying mantis in focus. So the depth of field covers the tip of the praying mantis's nose all the way to its tail. So you kind of have to experiment with the f-stop. Shutter speed is going to just be dependent on those other two things. So ISO as low as you can, use the f-stop that you need to keep whatever the main subject is in the focus the way you want it to be in focus. So you may have to use a tripod. And then you don't have to worry about noise reduction software and things like that. You'll get really nice detail in the shot. So that's my suggestion there. The other weird thing, typically I don't like stuff that's coming in, and most people don't, that are kind of, experts in photography, doing macros, I should say. People that are really into macro photography, and they don't like stuff bleeding in from the edges like this. But in this case it kind of works because it's balanced. We have something at the top here, something on the right, and we have this part on the left. So it works. It makes it a nice balanced shot, and it kind of frames the subject very nice. So if you got a real busy background and it's really hard to eliminate everything, you could do something like Sabine did here, which is a really nice job. You kind of get this kind of frame going on, and it worked real well. This shot, it's always difficult to photograph waterfalls that have a big fall, or streams and rivers that are in deep valleys. The reason being, if the sun is a little bit to the side, you get sun on one side, shade on the other, and it's very hard to expose. So your best bet is to come back to this scene when it's lightly overcast. Not too heavy, you don't want it too dark, but just lightly overcast. You'll have nice flat light laying on the subject. That's what I would suggest, is to come back to this scene where you could get more even lighting. Number one. Number two is this bar, this guardrail, is in the worst spot. It's right at the spill spot, right where the waterfall is hitting the stream below it. That is a spot where everyone looks. That is like we're looking at a waterfall. We're following the waterfall to this point and watching it spill out. So this bar kind of just ruins our experience to look at that shot. So work the scene and get rid of this bar. You don't want that bar, especially right there. I mean, it's bad everywhere, but it's the worst spot is right there. The other thing is a couple minor things, I guess. ISO 200 is okay. If you could get it lower, get it lower. F29 is really a small aperture. Generally speaking, you don't want to get your aperture too small because an effect called diffraction will occur. And what that means is when the light has to travel through such a small opening, it gets distorted. So your photograph won't be as crisp and sharp. You'll get a lot of depth of field, but the actual pixels won't be as crisp and sharp because it's getting distorted going through such a small aperture. Usually the sharpest part of your lens, I mentioned this before, is 2 to 4 stops up from wide open. So in this case, wide open is f of 3.5. So 2 to 4 stops would probably be around f5.6, f8, f11, in there somewhere. So if possible, dial in f8 or f11. And I think you would get a crisper, more clear shot. Of course, doing that's going to bring your, because you're letting more light in through the aperture, and your ISO is going to only be down 1 to f1 or ISO 100, let's say. It's going to shorten your shutter speed. So that means you might only have a 1 second shutter speed and you might not get the effect you want. That's why we use ND filters, neutral density filters, which just let less light through. It doesn't affect the color at all. At least the good ones don't affect the color at all. So you might have to use an ND filter to get a longer shutter speed to blur the water. This shot, I really like the composition. I really like everything about it, actually. There is, Sabine used an ISO of 4000, which is incredibly hot for an ISO. And what happens when you use such high ISOs, you get all this noise. Now, in this case, it works. It's a nice shot. It's kind of cool. If, in general, though, you might want to try to get this shot without that noise in it. And so you'd want an ISO 100. In night shots, you could get away with ISO 400, even maybe 600, 800, but I would try not to go higher than 400. You're going to have a ISO 10 times smaller. That means your shutter speed is going to be 10 times slower. So ISO of 400 means we're going to probably have a 38 second or so shutter speed. Now in doing that, if it's windy out or something like that, and this boat's moving at all, you're going to get some blur. So it might not be practical. And what Sabine did here is, understandable. But this is a big boat. I don't think it's going to move much. So you could probably get a decent breeze, and this boat won't be moving too much. So you could get away with a lower ISO and a longer shutter speed. And in doing so, this water would be even smoothed out even more and would get some probably more uniform reflections, which might improve too. One quick thing about the noise. Most modern DSLRs now have a thing called long exposure noise reduction. And what that means is, if you do, I don't know, I'm sure it varies from manufacturer to manufacturer, but anything that they consider a long exposure, it might be a second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, I don't know. Whatever it is for your manufacturer, for your camera, what it does is let's say it's a 10-second exposure. You take a 10-second exposure. Right after that 10 seconds is done, it closes down the shutter. It'll immediately takes another 10-second exposure, but this time it doesn't flip the mirror up. It leaves the mirror down. So it's taking a 10-second blank exposure as though you had the lens cap on. Now what that does is, when it's done with that exposure, any of this noise is going to be on a perfectly black picture. So your camera now knows where the hot spots are. It uses that as a reference for the real picture it took right before it, and it eliminates those hot spots in your real picture. Now, that's a great thing. It gets rid of a lot of noise. The bad thing about it is that your exposures are twice as long. So if you take a 10-second exposure, you really have to wait more than 20 seconds. Because the first 10 seconds is your exposure, the second 10 seconds is the blank exposure, and then it takes a few seconds to process the image. So that's just something that I always have on, though, is long exposure noise reduction. The other thing, small thing with this photograph, because I always want you guys to strive for perfection. I want you to be perfect, because all the magazines that, National Geographic and, all these magazines that have great photography in it, the shots are really perfect. These things right here in the lower right hand corner are just bleeding in. You really have to try to compose the shot so you're getting rid of this, because it's not adding to the image at all. Alright, so that's just, it might seem like I'm nitpicking a little, but really strive for perfection. That's how we all get better, when we strive to be perfect. And really, I'm never going to be perfect, but if I keep trying to be perfect, I get that much closer. It's a fantastic shot. I love the shot. The exposure is just fantastic. Now she used ISO 800. I mentioned that. It's okay. 0.6 of a second. If Sabine used ISO 400, it would have been 1.2 seconds, which still might have worked. It might not have had such pronounced ripples in the water, but I don't know. It's something to try and see. Maybe it would have been better. I don't know. It might have been a better effect, but I do like this look right here. Now I'm nitpicking again, but this little bright dot right there and this little bright line right there, clone those out. They're not adding to the picture. You're not showing stars up here. If there were a bunch of stars and those were there, they'd just blend right in with the rest. But they're kind of just slightly distracting because we want to look at the city and the reflections in this water. So get rid of those two, clone those out. Everything else is fine. ISO 800, like I mentioned, might be a touch high. You might want to try going a little lower. 5.6, it's okay. Typically you want, something around there. F5.6, F8, F11. Usually most of my lenses are at their sharpest around F11, but in a night shot you might not be able to get away with it. So it works. Very nice shot. This shot's perfect. I really can't even say any way that Sabine could improve this. The ISO 200, as I mentioned, you always want your ISO as low as it can go, but in a night shot, it's, you might have to tweak it up a little bit. And still, at ISO 200, it's got excellent detail. As you could see, the mortar between the bricks, and it's just a great shot. Just excellent. This shot here, I think Sabine told me this is 3 shots merged together. And before I looked at the shot, I thought she meant it was like a panorama. But I think what she did was she took 3 different exposures. She had one slightly overexposed, one properly exposed, and one underexposed. And she didn't do an HDR. She just probably put them in Photoshop and used a mask to mask out different parts of the image so she got a proper exposure. That's what I'm thinking she did. I'm not 100% sure. But what you would do is probably the sky up here is the underexposed shot, and maybe the middle part is the properly exposed shot, or it's probably the brighter parts are the underexposed shots, and the properly exposed shot could be the sky. Who knows? I really don't know. But either way, very nice job. I really do like this shot. I love the reflections. It's very nice composition, and very well done. And you can see there's nothing really bleeding in that's distracting you from the corners. There's not like a railing over here or anything like that. So it's very nicely done. But the next shot, which I don't believe is a merge shot, which is just a middle ground exposure, I love this shot. We have a great contrast of colors. We have these warmer colors of the bridge, the buildings, and the water, and the very cool sky. And we have some stars coming through. It's very nicely done. And I just love this shot. I think this is her best, strongest shot on a portfolio of 7 fantastic shots that she sent me. This is my favorite. Very well done. I've talked about it in the past, how you like to have, contrast, warm and cold, or contrasting textures, soft and hard. And this is a little bit of everything. We have the warm and the cold, and we have the hard and the soft. It's very well done. Very nicely done, Sabine. So I'd like to thank Sabine for sending me in her images. I'm really happy to critique them. And if you guys send me in images, you send them to critiques@anthonymorganti.com. 5 to 10 will work good. I'd prefer you put them up on Dropbox and email me the link to download them. That works better for me. So that way you don't have to try to send huge images through email. If you do, as I mentioned, I get a lot in. In the last 2 days, I got 6 or 7 different people sending me in images. And since I only do like 3 critiques a week, it's setting me back a little bit. So I do them in the order I get them. I was running around 3 weeks. I'm probably running a little longer now. But I'll do them as soon as I can. And I do appreciate you guys sending them in. And I do appreciate everyone that watches my videos and goes over to my website, reads the articles I write, and watches the videos over there. And I also, if you guys could do me a favor, if you haven't already, go to YouTube and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'd really appreciate that. So that's it for this episode 39 of Photo Critiques. Again, thank you, Sabine, very talented photographer, very intrigued by her work. I like seeing it. So talk to you guys soon.